I'd now like to welcome Piotr Godzisz, who comes to us from Slavonic and East European.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today I want to talk about hate crime and in fact hate crime laws and what they are meant to protect. So hate crime laws or hate crimes are crimes which are based on prejudice, and hate crime laws are laws which are there to punish this kind of crimes. Many scholars, and among them Paul Igański, they believe that hate crimes hurt more. They hurt more because they attack not only the immediate victim, but they attack also the community to which the victim belongs. They attack the core identity of the victim, and this is why it is said that the attacker's guilt is bigger, that the moral culpability is greater. So initially, hate crime laws were invented to protect people who were victimized because of their race. But since then, we've been adding new grounds to the list of protected attributes, and this is what my presentation today is about. So about the problems that we have with adding these new grounds, or when adding these new grounds. I will start by giving you an example of a recent case, and this will be a case from Poland, because Poland is a very good example to illustrate the current debates that there are about adding new grounds and how we can approach it. So the case I want to tell you about is a case of street gay bashing that happened over a year ago in Warsaw, the capital city of Poland. Two gay men, a couple, they were walking hand in hand on one of the main streets, and they were approached by three people, two men and one woman, who without any reason started to beat them. During the attack, they used homophobic slurs, and they managed to beat the couple severely. After the attack, the gay men, they managed to call the police, and the police managed to catch the attackers. They were sentenced later, but the court didn't treat this as hate crime because Poland does not recognize sexual orientation as a protected ground. They only recognize the law recognizes race, ethnicity, religion, and political affiliation, but does not recognize sexual orientation as a protected ground. So here I want to stop, and I want to ask you, do you think that homophobic crime is hate crime? If yes, please raise your hand. Thank you. So I see that the majority of you think that homophobia should be penalized as hate crime. How about if this were not gay men? How about if this was a straight couple, but they were goths? Do you think that this should also be treated as hate crime, that the penalty should be enhanced? Please raise your hand. Goths. So not that many, I see. We're a bit confused here, and it's not surprising. Academics who write about it are confused, and governments are confused as well. So it's not very surprising that we are. So most academics, and among them Barbara Perry and Paul Igański, they believe that there are two fundamental criteria to include a group in the protected groups league. So one of them is the group identity. That means that the groups which are protected, they have to be members of this group. They have to see themselves as a community. And then the other thing is a history of victimization, or a history of discrimination, of oppression of this group, history of marginalization of members of this community. So in the Western world, most commonly protected attributes today, they include race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. These are the grounds which are most commonly protected by hate crime legislation in the Western world. But some academics, and among them Neil Chakraborty and John Garland, they believe that we should not stick to this fundamental criteria that we should expand the laws to protect all groups which are victimized because they are seen as different and vulnerable. So in this case, we would include groups such as our pair of Goths. We would include sex workers or people who are homeless, because all of them are seen as different and vulnerable, and they are victimized because of who they are. But Gail Mason, she writes about 2 cases from Australia where courts decided that pedophiles, child offenders, should be treated as protected groups in cases when they were attacked. So this is what happens if we don't define very well who we want to protect and how we want to do that. So if we are not very clear about what we want to protect, we may end up expanding the protection to groups who are victimized because they themselves commit crimes. And we can then say that hate crime laws are there to protect people who are victimized even though they are different, even though they are innocent, they haven't done anything. And we can then also say that hate crime offenders have a greater moral culpability because they attack innocent people. So this is one of the issues that we have when we're talking about expanding the list of attributes which are protected. The other thing is how we're going to approach it. Should we keep adding new grounds? This is what actually most governments do. Or should we maybe think of a more universal term to describe them? Maybe something, something more generic, just or an open-ended list. So in Poland, there was also this discussion in 2012, and the ruling party came up with the idea to, instead of adding sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability to the list of protected grounds, they came up with an idea to add just one term after what's already protected. And they came up with this: natural or acquired personal characteristics. But nobody knew what that was. And nobody liked it, not even the government, even though this came from the ruling party. Because it's just too broad, it's too vague, so nobody knew what that would actually protect. So eventually it was dropped. It didn't make it into law, and the law since then has not been changed. So sexual orientation is still not covered by the hate crime legislation in Poland. But I believe that there is a case in adding, or in thinking maybe about describing rather than just adding new grounds, because it just gives judges more flexibility in deciding whether a particular case is hate crime or not. But at the same time, we have to be very careful how we approach that. So how does this affect race? Because we're here talking about race today, not about hate crime. So I think that racism is not anymore the only kind of bigotry or the only kind of prejudice that has to be combated with law. And actually homophobia is, I'm not sure who said it first, but is sometimes called the new racism. And on the international level, it's also being recognized more and more as something that has to be combated. In a recent case of Weidland and others versus Sweden from 2012, the European Court for Human Rights, for the first time in history, used the principles of combating hate speech in a case of homophobic hate speech. Previously, it was only used in cases of racist and xenophobic hate speech. But all these, adding new grounds and expanding the protection to other groups doesn't mean that, I believe that it doesn't mean that people who, or protection for people who are victimized because of their race will not diminish. I don't think the protection for them will diminish. I think the better we understand hate crimes and the better we understand hate crime laws, the better we can protect each of the victim. But at the same time, I understand that conservative people might have a problem with the fact that sexuality or homosexuality or homelessness or taste of music or lifestyle are put on the same page as race or religion. And as Barbara Perry said over 10 years ago, it just might be politically unsound for a lot of people, morally unsound for a lot of people, but it kind of is a fact that these things are put on the same page more and more often. But at the same time, we have to, and that's a call for both academics and policymakers. We have to think more clearly about defining new attributes in hate crime laws. And that's relevant for all jurisdictions. It's not only relevant for Poland, it's relevant also here. If we don't want hate crime laws to become what Gad and Dixon nicely put, narcissism of minor differences. Because this sort of narcissism can just be very, very dangerous and might, it's just very dangerous. So in my opinion, there is a case for expanding the protection to other grounds than just race. But at the same time, and that's what I would like to conclude with, both academics and policymakers should put more work in defining who should be protected by hate crime laws and how we should approach that. Thank you.
Splendid. Thank you very much, Piotr.